We're now joined by Anne Githuku-Shongwe, who's the Director for Regional Support Team for Eastern Southern Africa at UNAIDS. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. So good to talk to you. It's been a long time. You have to unmute, Anne.
Thank you. I've been released to unmute. Hi, Peter. How are you?
Fantastic.
Great to see you.
Good to see you. So a lot of people are looking at this Uganda AIDS bill, anti-gay bill, and looking at it through the lens of perhaps a moral issue, a human rights issue. But for you, your concern is that this is a serious issue in terms of health. How so?
Yeah, so Peter, we have about 1.5 million people living with HIV in Uganda. About 1.2 million of them are on treatment. And you know how it's been even for years, being able to have people confidently go into clinics and get their ARVs. You know, there's a lot of stigma and discrimination. But if you have a law or a bill that basically discriminates and stigmatizes men who have sex with men and gay men who are very vulnerable to HIV, then they will not go in for the drugs. They will not go in to get the treatment and the life-saving services that they need to get. And so this poses a threat. You know, here is Uganda pushing hard to be able to end AIDS by 2030. And they're faced with this bill that will impact on people who need to access these services. Same-sex relationships. When same-sex relationships are legal, like here in South Africa, we have about 60% more likelihood of them living with HIV. But when gay men and men who have sex with men are criminalized, like in Uganda, they have a 240% higher chance of living with HIV. And so the big issue for us is that with a bill like this, health providers cannot provide services because, you know, they too, as you saw in the provisions of this bill, that it is, you cannot provide services to people who are gay or men who have sex with men. You cannot, themselves cannot access services. Many NGOs provide services. Community organizations provide services to the MSM and gay people in Uganda. They will not be able to do so because their organizations would be deregistered. They're providing services. You saw the provisions of this bill. So this will impact on their ability to provide public health services to the nation.
Will people
and claw back these gains?
Yeah, but do people have to declare whether they're gay or homosexual when they access these health care facilities and this badly needed health care? Or is it just the appearance and mannerism that might give them away?
No, they do not have to declare. However, because of the particular type of, infections that you may have, if you have STIs, then obviously you would have to go to a clinic. There are drop-in centers, we call them DICs. There are drop-in centers that would provide services to, in particular, to men who have sex with men. And so, those services and those community organizations that provide those specific services would not be able to provide those services. So in that sense, there is already discrimination because the services would not be provided. But even then, they stigma because of appearance. They stigma against girls who go into clinics. They stigma, health workers have their own traditional or religious beliefs about who should be getting services or not. So while you don't have to declare your sexual orientation when you go into a clinic, stigma and discrimination is very prevalent, and that's some of the work we do. We do a lot of work on looking at what's the impact of stigma in society and in clinics, and we need to do a lot of work on the attitudes of health workers. And so this is quite a big issue for us. And so in looking at this law, we really are calling on Parliament, on the President, to really take a second look at this and be able to ensure that he can not only work against this discriminatory issue, which our executive director of OHCHR, the Human Rights Organization, has already stated, but be very clear about the fact that not only does it prevent human rights, but it also impacts on public health. And really, Peter, in many of our African societies, for centuries, we have had same-sex. We have names for same-sex couples in some of our African languages. So they've always been with us. In the Bible, they're mentioned. So they've always been with us. We've always had, same-sex relations. And so the discrimination that this law is bringing, which is expanding the colonial sodomy laws, is really just pushing so much harder on discrimination at a level that we have not seen. It will be harmful to our society. It will be harmful to people who need to access these services and really push back against gains that Uganda has made so significantly. They are a real leader. You remember Uganda was one of the first countries with HIV. They have been a real leader and they can turn the tide, but they have to make sure that services are available to anybody who needs those services. Nobody should be discriminated against.
There are, I think, 30 countries or so on the continent that have banned same-sex relationships. So do you have, looking at these countries, enough empirical evidence to show that where same-sex relationships are banned, the prevalence of HIV in same-sex relationships is much higher?
Absolutely, and I think I shared this, that we know that in countries where same-sex relations, Botswana, Angola, Madagascar, South Africa, these are countries that allow for same-sex relations. And in those countries, maybe about 60% likelihood of being infected with HIV, which is still really very high because the vulnerability is high. But in countries like Uganda now, we've had more countries. Burundi right now, we've got 22 people in jail in Burundi. In Zambia, recently, there was 3 people who had been arrested. In Kenya now, there's been lots of pushback in Kenya as well. In Ghana, in Senegal, we're seeing pushback in multiple countries right now. And as you said, there's these 30 countries, where these discriminatory laws exist. And in those countries, there's a 240% chance of people being, of gay men and men who have sex with men being likely to be with HIV. So it is 5 times more than it would be if it was, if we didn't have this discriminatory law. So it is important for us, and it is work that we do. We recognize that there are differences from one country to the next, and we're working across these countries to make sure that the right to health and the human right to exist and to be are provided for. This is what our countries have signed up to. They are all members of the United Nations. And as members of the United Nations, we passed a political declaration last year. And in that political declaration, other than about 2 countries, I think that withheld, all the other countries signed on committing to seeing the end of AIDS and ensuring, therefore, that all discriminatory laws are passed. And so this is where we are. We in Africa really, this is the epicenter of HIV. We still have over 50% of people living with HIV across the world in this region. And so we have lots of work to do, and we cannot afford to have punitive laws that prohibit the provision of services and access to services to men who have sex with men and gay men. But this punitive laws also affect others. In some countries, there's punitive laws that, where people cannot, people who transmit HIV are arrested or locked up, But what is really just of grave concern to us is that the extreme nature of this law, the introduction of death penalty as a result of aggravated cases is very worrying. And also, I think, Peter, the big thing is that there's a lot of ambiguity in terms of determining who has violated, right? And so what we found is that just in the last couple of months or the last month, we've seen over 110 cases of people living, people who are suspected to be LGBTQI, who are either arrested or they're harassed, and without any real basis for it, where their safety is threatened. And so they're living in fear right now, not able to forget about accessing services. They're not able to function, to go to work, to rent places to live. Because there is pushback. There is huge pushback from all communities, based on religious beliefs or traditional beliefs, and it is really, really of grave concern to us.
I am pretty sure that you've made representations to the authorities. Do they understand
Yes.
that this will hamper their own HIV/AIDS prevention ambitions?
Well, we have been working with some of the minority members, and we've been presenting in support. I mean, we're the United Nations, we're not the state itself, but we have been working very closely with organizations, community organizations, with some parliamentarians, with, there are sympathetic members across the government. And yes, we are working with them, and we are focusing on this public health agenda. And we're very, very hopeful that President Museveni has been, for decades, a really strong leader in the HIV response. His political commitment to the HIV response has continued since the early days when Uganda was so devastated by HIV. And in fact, even now, he has been, committing to ensuring that his government would finance, AIDS to the end, till 2030 and beyond. We will make sure that everybody stays on HIV treatment, and that the government will do everything it can to invest. So it really has a very strong program. But I think, this is just this law. And it's not a lot of people. It's not millions and millions of people that we're talking about. These are small minority groups when we talk about MSM and LGBTQI. These are not large groups in the country. And so, as your interview, the president was saying, these are people with whom we have coexisted for decades, for centuries, really. And they should be able to have the right to life, the right to operate, the right to function, the right to access health services like any other citizen. These are our children. Yeah. These are our brothers and sisters. These are our parents, It's not people who exist from somewhere else.
You talked about...
we are them and they are us, completely.
You've talked about religion, you've talked about culture, all this social pressure. Listening to the president, I have to say, could there be also ignorance about homosexuality? Because for him to compare homosexuality to having a sixth finger, it just speaks volumes perhaps to a lack of understanding, and this could be part of the problem.
Well, there's no question about it. I have to say, there's been a lot of misinformation in this environment. In fact, in the case of Uganda, one of the concerning bits, misinformation, sort of propaganda that has been out there for a while, has been that there is recruitment of young Ugandans, children in Uganda, to become homosexual. There has been propaganda about, abuse and violence and, just wanton behavior in the streets, And this is what prevails, not just in Uganda, but across our countries, where there is an assumption and an association that with homosexuality comes this real intention to recruit en masse and to change society into a society that is perhaps deviant, as the president makes reference to. And so perhaps there is a misunderstanding, but I think also there really has been a lot of push from large religious fundamentalist groups from across the world pushing back against, what we see the rights and equality that prevails in our countries, that the UN has been promoting, that many of our countries are as member states themselves have subscribed to. Even for gender equality, this is not something that just some of this is not just misinformation that happens in relation to homosexuality. It happens in terms of gender inequality, as you know. And so we really have been working with traditional leaders. We've been working with, the Kabaka of Uganda, for instance, the Queen of Toro. These are traditional leaders who have been, very progressive in their thinking, and I think who recognize that this is something that exists in society. And so we really want to believe that if we, that there's information that can equip, science and information that can equip the country to rethink this decision, for our political leaders, for His Excellency the President, who for us has been such an incredible leader on the response to HIV. And we really are trusting that he will look at the science, look at the impact that this decision will have, and reconsider. We believe that he has the power to make a different decision that will change the trajectory of Uganda and of this region, to make sure that indeed, the many young people who exist in Uganda would be able to live free, to access health, education, and jobs, no matter their sexual orientation or sexual preference. This is the reality of the 21st century that we live in right now, and we cannot pretend that this is not the case.
And thank you so much indeed for joining us. Thanks for highlighting this very important issue.
Thanks, Peter. Great to be here.
All right, that's Anne Githuku-Shongwe, who's the UNAIDS Regional Director for Regional Support Team for East and Southern Africa. And it's not just a morality issue. This actually is a real health issue. And statistics show that in countries where same-sex relationships are banned, the prevalence of HIV and AIDS is 6 times more in people in same-sex relationships. So something that we really need to take cognizance of.